Hello and welcome to the podcast, 10 Lessons It Took Me 50 Years to Learn, where we dispense wisdom for career and life. That's wisdom for your career, your life. My name is Duff Watkins and I'm your host. Our guest today is Oliver Burkeman, an award-winning British journalist who for many years wrote a column for The Guardian. The column is called, "This Column Can Change Your Life," and it did. Oliver, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Oh, this whole trip began for me. I read your book, The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. I thought, if a book was ever engineered for somebody, it was engineered for me. And by the way, I just checked the Amazon ratings, various rating sites. That book for listeners and viewers is ranked 4.5 stars on Amazon, Amazon Brazil, and other ones as well. So it's quite a popular book. But you've got a new book out called 4,000 Weeks. And there's a story behind that title.
Right. Yeah. The title of the book is 4,000 Weeks. The subtitle is Time Management for Mortals. And 4,000 weeks is very approximately the life that you can expect to live on average, today in the West. If you live to be 80, you'll have had a few more than 4,000 actually, to get precise about it. And if you're lucky, you might have 5,000, and certain record-breaking figures in history have gone above 6,000. But it's all still pretty low figures when you put it in weeks, I think. And so, I just wanted to use that as a sort of way into the book's theme, which is what changes about how we understand time and time management and living a meaningful life when you sort of face up to the big limitation here, the finitude that we're all dealing with.
Well, in fact, one of the reviewers said it was described the book as time management equals confronting finitude. And I actually did a bit of math myself, is that if you look at your working life, the time when you earn money, the time where you contribute, where you produce, where you are working, it's closer to 1,800 weeks. So we don't have that much time to contribute in a conventional working sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's as well, I'm sure we'll talk about as we talk about other stuff. I mean, I always want to sort of push back even against my own title in a way and say that I don't think that the message of the book or of the stuff I write about on this topic, I don't think it would be right to take the message as being like, oh my goodness, there's so little time, so I better really panic about seizing every day and, immediately leave my job to go and set up a base jumping company in the mountains of New Zealand, doing these astonishing things, these unusual things. That is the path that some people choose to take. But it's almost that the reason I want to bring up this point about how limited our time is because I think that most of the ways that we go about thinking about time, and certainly a lot of advice that you see on time management and productivity, it actually is premised on this idea we might somehow be able to do everything and be so efficient and perfect at this stuff that we could never have to make any tough decisions or let anything go. And so in a way, it's a relief, I think, to see like, no, that is an impossible quest. And once you sort of see that it's impossible, it frees you up to do something really great and meaningful, but possible with your life. So I think I hope it's sort of a liberation rather than entirely a cause for panic attacks,
Well, would you say that this obsession with productivity, which we have in the Western world, certainly in the corporate world, would you say it's a defense against anxiety?
I think that's how it gets used. I mean, there's certainly nothing wrong with wanting to be productive or even wanting to be more efficient. I still look for ways to get rid of pointless expenditures of time in the course of my workflow, whatever. But I think by and large, certainly in my personal experience, it gets used as a form of emotional avoidance, right? Because you can't do everything. You can't make yourself hyper efficient to the point where there's no limit to what you can deal with or what you can execute or implement. But as long as you're following some doctrine of productivity that makes it seem like soon you will reach that position, the fantasy can stay alive, right? And you can keep chasing this moment, which is never now. It's always maybe next month or next year once I've got this whole system fully worked out and it's, blah, blah, blah. Then, your life will be in perfect working order, you tell yourself. And as long as you're doing that, you don't have to feel the discomfort of our real situation, which is, that reality has certain limitations built in with our limited amount of time, the limited degree to which we can control how it unfolds. the fact that like other people are always annoyingly getting in the way of your own plans for your life. Or,
I've noticed that too. Yes. But one of the subtexts, if I read it correctly, of your book is choose what to neglect.
right. And I think this is an important point because it's very much to do with becoming conscious of something that we're already doing. So I think it's important to say that, like, as finite humans, we are always choosing. There are always trade-offs involved. Anything you decide to do with an hour of your life, you're by definition deciding not to do countless other things. This is all a given. You don't get to choose to opt out of that situation. But what you do get to choose is to be more conscious about this fact, not to seek ways to deny it or not feel the discomfort of it, but to face it. And once you see that you have to be procrastinating on most things at any given moment, once you see that you have to neglect, most things at any given moment, it's a lot easier. I think it's a difficult path in a certain way, but it's a possible path. Whereas the one about I'm never going to have to neglect anything, I'm going to please everybody, I'm not going to let anybody down, and I'm going to fulfill every single ambition that I can come up with, or whatever it might be, that is a torment because that can't ever come to pass.
Well, and I think as you put it in your book, your inbox is never empty. It just
Right. And
no
in fact,
matter
the
how.
process of trying to clear it generates more emails. So it's like struggling in quicksand.
All right. Well, let's get to your 10 lessons then. 10 lessons that took you 50 years to learn. Number one, seek enlargement, not happiness. What, this is not pro obesity, is it, Oliver? I mean, that's not going to work in this day and age.
I, I'm well. There'll be no. I'm no. This is growth. No fat shaming
Okay.
here. What I want to say is this is a line which I want to fully attribute to an extremely wise Jungian psychoanalyst whose work I really admire and who I've since had the privilege of getting to know a bit, James Hollis. All of whose books I would heartily recommend, but who makes this argument that if you're facing a fork in the road in your life or a difficult choice or deciding what to do, a much better question than will this make me happy is, will this choice enlarge me or diminish me? Partly it's just well known at this point, right, that we are terrible at predicting what will make us happy. This is like a famous finding of social psychology at this point. Also, I think happiness and asking the question about happiness leads you off in the direction of comfort and avoidance and sort of not having to feel certain things that you might not want to feel. Whereas enlargement, most people know the answer to this question, right? If you're facing a dilemma, most people do know when they ask themselves and look inside, maybe they need to give it a few weeks, but like whether the thing they're considering embarking upon is going to sort of enlarge their soul in a way, to use that kind of metaphorical language. So a good example of this, and we've all experienced sort of difficulties in relationships, right? Dissatisfaction or conflict or ambivalence. And it's very hard to know whether, sticking with a relationship is going to make you in the short or medium term happier than if you didn't. It might well be that, happiest would be on your own, sitting at home watching Netflix, doing nothing else. But when you ask this question about enlargement, it gets very clear because I think you can really understand there are the kinds of difficulties that you come across in a relationship where you think like, okay, this isn't fun what we're going through, but it's important. And we are both becoming bigger people as a result of this. And this applies to professional relationships, I think, as well as romantic ones. You just intuitively know that it's the kind of difficulty that is ultimately edifying and good to go through versus the kind where you might be, in a relationship with someone with a really severe personality disorder, or you might be in an abusive relationship, or it might be a professional relationship where you're just being taken for a ride and exploited. And then, as well, I think mostly in your heart, in your gut, oh, this is not that kind of difficulty. This is the kind of difficulty it is actually right to get myself away from and to protect myself from. And you can only get there by asking these questions about enlargement, I think, instead of these questions about happiness, which will lead you astray all the time.
And this enlargement, this personal growth, is not to be confused with pleasure. That is to say, it's not always fun, not always pleasurable to experience, but ultimately it is the payoff. That's the process to maturation.
Right. It's a way of filtering between two different kinds of problem, I think, that we can experience in life. One is like the stuff that growth and life and meaning is made of. And then the other is the kind of problem that absolutely people should, like, do what they can to minimize and stay away from toxic people and all the rest of it. I've found that very useful in my own life on multiple occasions to ask that kind of question, because pretty soon the answer does sort of bubble up in a way that it doesn't when happiness is the question.
Yeah, sometimes the quest for happiness sort of pollutes the question. But
Right. And is it comfort you're seeking, and which might actually be bad in this particular case, and all sorts of other factors?
mm,
Happiness comes along for the ride, one hopes, but I think that's how you have to think about happiness, not as the goal you're going to
it's been
strive
described as a
directly.
byproduct, yeah, a byproduct rather than a destination. All right, lesson number 2. Everyone is just winging it. I knew it, Oliver. I knew there's no master plan behind all of this. It just confirms everything I've suspected for decades.
I wrote a piece with roughly that headline. What I think it was getting on for well, it must be 8 years ago now, something more. And since then, I feel like it was about some sort of minor misstep that President Obama had made, and everyone was responding like, "How could the White House possibly have made this mistake?" And you're just like, "Well, because everyone is just winging it all the time." And like the idea that just because someone is the president, they've discovered the secret to knowing what the heck is going on in the world is not true. That feels a little dated now, because I feel like everything that's happened to politics since then is like, now it's incredibly clear over and over again, pretty much no matter what your political stance, that our leaders are absolutely no more perfect at having things sorted out than anyone else. It seems like we're reminded of that over the last few years on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean on a daily basis. And I just think it's a really interesting, it's a good way of dealing with. Firstly, I think it's true. I think in the sense that we assume someone somewhere knows what's going on. Actually, no one does know what's going on. I don't mean that, people don't have expertises that they put to good use in their work. But there's this strong sense, it's a bit like a child with a parent, right? Except now we're the grown-ups. You want to know that somebody somewhere in your company, in your life, in your state, nation, really knows what's going on and isn't sort of improvising from moment to moment. And actually, that's a theory behind a lot of an explanation behind a bunch of conspiracy theories.
Yes,
Is that
yes.
people find it more calming to believe that an evil cabal is manipulating the world than that it is really as chaotic and random and unpredictable as it really is. They would rather believe in some evil puppet masters.
And it's
That's
just another defense against anxiety, the
right,
personal
right,
anxiety,
right.
because I'm dealing with this entropy, which is real and is out there. And so it's much
Yep,
better for me to think that, the Jews are behind it, or,
right. Yeah.
the Catholic Society, whatever it is,
Right, right. Exactly. Yes, it's a comfort. It's a comfort device, and people are willing to sort of falsify the facts completely to feel that comfort. But in daily life, those of us who are not conspiracy theorists, I think what this is really useful for is just that it serves as a big relief and as a motivation, I think, to people who may be afflicted by some degree of imposter syndrome, of thinking that they're not quite ready to make their contribution, that they need to know more before they make their voices heard. That can be true sometimes. That it's good that people go through long medical training before they operate on me. But I think it acts primarily in life to sort of hold people back because they are under a misimpression about the competence and confidence of the people around them. The reason you only hear your own monologue of internal self-doubt is not because no one else has them. It's because you only hear your own internal monologue. So I'm always saying, some people want to say about imposter syndrome, like, no, 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 you're great. You know what you're doing. You can go out there, you can join them. You're just as good. And I want to say, well, you are just as good, but only because nobody knows what they're doing. So in a way, like, we're all imposters in a crucial way, I think. And I think it's just useful to.
Well, when I read that lesson, it reminded me in my previous podcast, I used to interview a lot of US politicians, senators, governors, US ambassadors. And what I came away with is that they're all guys. They're just guys. I mean, really, so many senior
Right. Yeah.
executives. I mean, senior executives that I wouldn't personally feed, if it was up to me, but they're smart, they're intelligent, they have their pluses and their
Yeah.
skills of obtaining that position and maintaining that position. But
Yep.
many a time I walked away thinking, my God, those are people who are awesomely average. And that's okay, because that's pretty much the way the rest of us are too. And not to be
Right.
underestimated, but so, okay, so we're winging it. What does that mean for a person listening to this podcast, or the person who's going to pick up your book, 4,000 Weeks?
I think what it means above all is that the sense that I think a lot of people have, and that I certainly have, of always kind of improvising your responses to things, never quite being absolutely certain, never quite sort of just following some steps in some particular work, but it's always having to sort of create everything afresh, always feeling that you're not quite yet in this kind of serene position of command and control over your life. But this isn't a problem, that this is not something to sort of feel bad about, because it means you're not there yet. And I fall into this myself every time. I write an email newsletter every couple of weeks, and I'm always struck by how it feels like I'm always sort of starting from scratch and trying to figure out what an email newsletter should be, and wondering if I've got a really good point to make. And you never get to the stage where you're just like, okay, it's all in working order. I just need to plug and play, or whatever the right
Mhm,
metaphor is.
mhm,
You never get there. And actually, I think in writing, it's sort of important that one never gets there, because it keeps you
mhm.
fresh and creative. But it's really useful to remember that this is the nature of being human, right? One way of thinking about it is in terms of time, and that's the one I explore in the book, especially, right? We're all sort of on the leading edge of the present moment, moving into the future. The president of the United States, the chief executive of the World Bank, they have as little certainty about what happens in the next hour as you or I, or the lowliest person one could imagine. And that's really useful to remember. I think, like, it's scary, because what you really want is somebody saying, like, it's all right, I've looked ahead. I've gone ahead a century, and I can tell you, like, this climate change stuff is scary, but we figure it out. Maybe we don't. And I think we have to accept that in order precisely to start making our own meaningful contributions.
Well, facing reality unflinchingly is something that takes a lot of practice. I've been working on it for a long while now. And
Right. Yeah. I don't think you ever get there. I think it's
yeah,
absolutely important.
yeah. And one of the things that you do end up facing is we are finite creatures. We have finite amounts of emotional, physical, psychological energy. So you have to deploy it wisely, because it runs out. It's renewable,
Yeah.
it's replenishable, but it runs
Yep.
out.
Yeah.
Um, All right. The lesson number 3, you're always procrastinating about something.
Yes. I mean, this is the truth that I think we touched on a little bit at the beginning, that, because time is finite, because every decision to do something is a decision not to do something else, it's better to think about procrastination as something to become better at, rather than something to try to eradicate from your life. Of all the projects, I mean, it's different for different people, but of how many projects you wish you were working on or want to be working on, there's no option but to neglect most of them at any one time. So the important question is not, how do I not neglect anything that I have on my plate? The important question is, how do I make the wisest choices about what to neglect? And I think once you see that, it becomes a lot easier to make those choices. You can let go. If you're going to beat yourself up about not making progress on something that is important, you're always going to be beating yourself up, because that
Mhm.
is the nature of, especially the world in which we live in, right? Where there are so many effectively sort of infinite demands on our time, but also infinite opportunities and possibilities. We need a way of thinking about this that doesn't, maybe once it was possible to sort of feel like you were taking care of every single thing in your life that needed taking care of. But that's sort of systematically impossible now. And so we would do much better to try and make these decisions carefully, I think.
Nicholas Taleb says in his book, he's very much pro procrastination. He says basically it's just your brain telling you, get on with it, go on to something else. This is not stimulating. It's not interesting. It's not worthwhile. It's not, you can return to it later, but get on to something that engages you more. And he said he's made his whole career by doing that, reading only what he wants to read when he wants to read it.
Yes.
And there is a great deal of truth and power in this. There's even a method which says you work in small batches of time, 20, 25 minutes, something like that.
Yep.
And I believe it works because it's a way of feeding you a constant, sustainable set of stimulation without trying to force yourself to concentrate or focus on this unduly. Does that ring a bell with you in terms of your thoughts about procrastination?
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of benefits to it. And I love the whole like Nassim Taleb approach of just like jump from thing to thing that stimulates you. I think there's an issue there for a lot of us, which might not be, maybe not for him. He's a pretty one-off
He's a different
personality
dude. Yes, let's agree.
in all
He's a
sorts of
different
ways,
kind of dude.
which is, that if you just completely let yourself bounce from thing to thing, a lot of us, I think, are going to bounce away from things as soon as they get difficult. So we're going to neglect the truth that like a lot of meaningful stuff is going to feel difficult. So I think it's more a question of understanding that you'll be neglecting a bunch of stuff, understanding that things that matter often feel uncomfortable to do, and that one of the great appeals of distraction is that we get to not feel that discomfort because we're just scrolling through social media or something instead. And then you can sort of let go of that's what enables you, I think, to sort of focus on one thing at a time. It's the willingness to tolerate the mild anxiety that comes from knowing about all the other things you're not focusing on. So I guess my slight pushback against just go where your interest lies from moment to moment is yes, but be sure that that interest isn't really code for comfort. Because I'm always struck with myself, for example, like I'm not talking about people suggesting people should like fight their way through work that they hate.
Mhm.
If they can avoid that, they should avoid it. I can be writing something that I care about, that I'm enjoying. The amount of difficulty that I have to encounter in order to go and check Twitter instead is tiny. It has to be the mild irritation of not being able to get a sentence right the first time. And I'm like, oh, forget it. And then like an hour later, I realize I've just wasted my time just because I didn't want to stick around for that small feeling of like unpleasantness.
Well, personally, I mean, I have similar problems, but when I start resisting and procrastinating, I mean, I'm a disciplined guy, so when it happens with me, I think, well, what is the resistance all about? And so I'll ask myself, what is the resistance all about? Just go ahead and tell me, and we'll
Yeah.
save a bit of time here. And sometimes I get an answer, sometimes I don't, but I now collaborate with procrastination rather than call myself
Yep.
names or the self-punitive things that people go on about.
Right. Yeah. It's not about taking this discomfort and like eradicating it, like punching it in the face. It's about taking it and saying like, okay, the discomfort is going to be here too. All right. Hello. Sit down, take a
Yes.
seat. And meanwhile,
Well,
I'm going to do stuff that I want to do. Yeah.
we'll work through it together, you and I,
Yeah,
discomfort.
exactly.
All right. Well, lesson number 4 is a truly existential lesson. Nobody else really cares what you do with your life.
Some people object to this one, but I'm happy to talk about it. I'm sort of quoting here a psychotherapist and writer and yoga person called Stephen Cope, who wrote a book called The Great Work of Your Life. And I think what this really gets at is how easily we can be sent off in a certain direction in our lives, especially our work lives, on the basis of the idea that we need to fulfill a certain agenda, often a parental agenda, even long after people's parents have died. You sometimes find that people are following these agendas, maybe a societal one about the kind of, fame or certain kind of wealth that our society so strongly rewards. And like, it's really liberating to suddenly be like, oh, you don't have to, nobody cares about this. I don't mean that nobody cares about you. Hopefully we all have a few people in our lives who care that whatever it is we're doing makes us happy. And we probably have a few people in our lives who care that whatever we're doing brings in enough money to the household to help support them as well as us. So it's not like it's not a sort of nihilistic sort of forget about it, doesn't matter. But it's just like if your friends, your spouse, and hopefully your parents, although that can be difficult, if they really respect you and love you, they'll be happy for you to do whatever you're doing that speaks to you. And I think that's a very important kind of message that some people need to hear, because it's very easy to sort of find yourself 10 years into a career as a lawyer or all sorts of other things. I don't know why I bring that example up. um, and be like, hold on, like I'm doing this because I thought my teachers at school thought I'd be good at it. And so I'm trying to please them. But like, not only should their word not carry the day, but like if you went back and asked them, they'd be like, "Oh goodness, no, do whatever makes you feel motivated and meaningful," right?
Well, I encounter this in writing. You're a writer. I write, and a writer who writes novels and screenplays. The way he put it like this. I mean, we were talking about procrastinating earlier, and he said, "Nobody cares if you write. Nobody cares if you don't write." And that's it. So to me, it is a very important lesson to learn that really nobody cares. And I mean, although that can be scary and intimidating, the point is, it really is up to you. It's your life. You have some autonomy over it, and that could be very fearful for people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's also a scary thing as well as a liberating thing, right? This idea that you sort of might be up to you. Yeah.
All right, lesson number 5. Oh, this is the jewel. This is a jewel. Your ability to tolerate minor discomfort is your superpower.
Well, this relates. I mean, I've already touched on this as it turns out, haven't I, in one of the other ones? But I mean, I think this is a lesson that I really feel like I've learned in a very personal way, that I guess it's a key insight of a lot of psychotherapy in a way, this idea that we sort of structure our lives to a very great extent around sort of not wanting to feel certain emotions that we think implicitly we seem to think would sort of destroy us if we were to have to
Mhm.
feel them. And I think you can do a whole sort of argument about why people bring these ideas from their early childhoods. But again and again, you find out that actually, in most contexts in life, if you sort of do the thing that is going to cause you to feel these feelings, it's minor discomfort that you feel. It isn't pain and agony. So I think it's very important in that as an idea. I use it as a reminder that when I feel the first feelings of anxiety about something that I'm doing or a conversation that I'm having or something, it's a useful reminder that that might be about as bad as it's ever going to get in
Mhm.
most cases, that level of discomfort. In my mind, I always think of the analogy of if you've ever had dental work done under local anesthetic, it's really effective. It works. You do not feel excruciating pain, but when they're sort of grappling around inside your mouth, you have the feeling that any moment it's horrible. You're braced because you're convinced that any moment there's going to be excruciating pain. But actually, at least for the procedures I've had done, there never is excruciating pain because the local anesthetic works. And it's a little bit similar to that, right? You sit down at your computer to finally try and write some difficult thing, or you decide it's probably time to have an awkward but important conversation with somebody, and you feel like, but that feeling of that's about as bad as it's going to get. So it's actually
Mm.
perfectly tolerable. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Every emotional state that I've ever actually experienced thus far in life, I have been able to tolerate, and it hasn't destroyed me. Hence, here I am. But the feeling is always, I can't go there, because if I went there, that that emotional experience would be intolerable.
Well, your lesson reminds me of the work of the esteemed Australian psychiatrist, Dr. Ainsley Mears, the late Dr. Mears. He wrote very similar things back in the 70s and 80s. And he actually urged people to practice meditation in a position of minor physical discomfort so that you could relax mentally, not physically. Physical relaxation is easy, so that you could relax mentally. And by doing so, your defenses would melt and your mind would present truth or fact to
Mhm.
you about yourself, and you would be unguarded. He called it a reverting to a primitive, defenseless, childlike state. And you would be able to accept it and hear it from yourself. And it would be okay. And you would learn the truth
Mhm.
about yourself, and you would be able to tolerate it. And you mentioned dental. Um, he had wisdom teeth taken out without any anesthetic. And
Wow.
I mean, this, yeah, exactly. He would put himself in self hypnosis in this deep state of relaxation. And, he was not a young guy, but geez, he was a tough bird, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right.
and he said, all you need to do is practice it a few minutes a day. He would talk 5 minutes, maybe 10 or more. And I had been practicing, I practiced this on and off diligently over the years. And it certainly is effective in the sense that you become aware of realities about yourself. And for once, you're not threatened or made anxious by it. You're just able to see it and
Mhm. Mhm.
the revelations occur. So your comment is just uh, well, and is certainly verified by Dr. Mears and me.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
Lesson number 6. This is a good one. What makes it unbearable is your mistaken belief that it can be cured.
This is a quote from Charlotte Jocko Beck, the late American Zen teacher. And she's just talking about the human condition in general, I think, in this quote. And this is, I think, a sort of a guiding principle that I've really happened upon that recurs again and again in all sorts of contexts. This idea that certain kinds of problem that we encounter in life are really only such a huge problem because we think that we ought to have solved them and we haven't yet solved them. And life itself, I think some people sort of see as a kind of a problem to be solved, and that they haven't yet solved it is a cause of torment or agony for them. And what she's saying here, I think, is, life has sadness in it. Life has loss. Life has difficult decisions that are imperfect, where you don't get the best result. And it has times when you fail or people ridicule you. It has all these things. They're not pleasant. You make them a heck of a lot worse if you also demand that there should not be problems in life. And if you object not only to what is happening, but to like the fact that it is happening as if that were itself an injustice. So it's not about being okay with, it's not about being just like calmly sailing through the bad stuff that happens in life, but about remembering when it happens that like, it isn't a problem that these things are happening. They are problems. But it isn't sort of a sign that you're doing life wrong or necessarily a sign that other people are treating you badly, although in any given case they might be, that you're having problems. And that if you're sort of running constantly to this far off idea that one day you're going to get to a point in life where you don't have any problems at all, then you're sort of just deliberately setting yourself up for permanent dissatisfaction. That's the idea.
The word is vicissitudes, just the normal trials and tribulations that occur in life.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no getting away from them.
Yeah, exactly.
Lesson number 7, let things take the time that they take.
So I guess this is about discomfort as well in a different way. It's about patience. I think certainly one I've struggled with. I think, and I sort of unpacked this a bit in the book. One of the things that I think we try to do, we sort of assume, and we're aided in this assumption by the state of technology, is that life moves faster. We have all sorts of extra control over how fast things can go. We can microwave food in 2 minutes instead of waiting 2 hours for the oven. We can fly somewhere in a few hours instead of having to get on a ocean liner for 2-3 weeks. It makes it actually worse to be forced to remember that we can't actually make the whole world go at the right pace that we want it to go, and that there's all sorts of aspects of life that that just do require, they have their own rhythm and tempo, and you need to let them have that. Otherwise, it's a recipe for sort of endless frustration. I think one really good example I always come back to is reading. People often complain today that they don't have time to read. And I think usually they don't mean that they can't find half an hour in a 24-hour period when they could sit down with a book. What they mean is that when they do that, their mind is sort of conditioned to not slowing down to the pace of reading a good novel, reading a good nonfiction book. The flywheel is running too fast. And we experience a kind of tension between how quickly we'd like to be able to sort of download the information from that book or experience the story in that book, as opposed to just accepting that a book takes a certain amount of time. Reading takes a certain amount of time. By and large, we don't claim otherwise about movies or concertos. They take the time they take, but there's all sorts of experiences where we kind of assume that they ought to be instantaneous if we want them to be. And I
Mhm.
think that sort of, again, it's a sort of refusal to work with reality.
Lesson number 8. You don't really want the control that you think you need.
I feel like this is another theme that I keep encountering and that I encounter in myself, and that you experiences in life all the time, which is that right, we want, a lot of us, we want a certain kind of feeling of being in control of things. Some people want it in a sense of being in control of other people, um, in control of our time, in control of what we let into a day. And yet there's something wrong with this picture, because when you get close to that in any particular domain, you find that it kind of sucks the life out of the experience. And that, if you sort of are the kind of person who draws up very strict schedules for your day, mostly your experience will be that life gets in the way. But occasionally it might be that everything goes exactly as planned, and there's something missing there. There's something that is missing from the quality of life. I talk in the book about control, sort of individual versus communal time, the sense that, you know, in the culture at the moment, we very much, certainly in America and the UK, we very much sort of champion uh, individual time sovereignty, right? The goal
Mhm.
is that the dream job is to be like a digital nomad. You get to take your laptop anywhere you like. You run the day, you stop when you want. And actually, lots of digital nomads will tell you that it gets lonely sometimes, and because they're not sort of coordinated with the patterns of other people. And then even just like someone like me, not a digital nomad, I have friends and family here in New York, but so many of us are kind of freelance this or that, or self-employed this or that. We have a lot of freedom over our time, but the result of all that freedom is that we are persistently sort of unsynchronized from each other, and it's actually
Mhm.
incredibly difficult to find a night when three friends can all meet for a beer or something like that, because
Mhm.
our schedules are all sort of out of whack. And when you look at countries, I look at some studies from Scandinavia where there's a certain amount of socially imposed regularity about when people go on vacation and how long people work in the day. And there's a certain loss of freedom, of individual freedom. There do appear to be quite big benefits in terms of people's happiness and sense of meaning in life. I mean, I think
Mhm.
you can go too far
Mhm.
in that as well. Some sort of freedom is obviously important, but it's an interesting thing to bear in mind.
So what if people, okay, for me, being a reformed control freak, I mean, basically, you learn over time how little control you have. So, I mean, what a waste
Right,
of
right.
time. I mean, you have the ability to influence events, maybe nudge, maybe inspire, maybe persuade, or I don't know, but control 4/5 above all is what I reckon. But so what? And that might be a little high. you know,
Yes.
so what's driving people to want to obtain this control? So what if they got the control that they desired?
What would happen?
Yeah. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I think at an extreme point, control and relationship are sort of antithetical to each other, right? That the perfectly in control person is not really in relationship with anybody else because he's sort of perfectly in control. And yet all the good things in life, ultimately, whether it's intimate relationships or it's like work projects that you're launching, they all require relationship. It might be that you're working in a team to produce something, or it might be that you're working on your own to produce like a book or an article. But even then, you've got to let it go into relationship with other people and see what they make of it, and not try to maintain total control. Um, I mean, a really grim and awful parallel to illustrate this is in with sort of like very, very controlling kind of abusive relationships, and the psychology there, where sometimes very, very violent men commit horrible, horrible crimes because uh, uh, and you see it in sort of cult psychology as well. It's because they crave and impose a certain kind of control, and then achieving it is sort of repulsive to them and triggers this kind of blind rage. because they actually feed on the sense of trying to impose the control rather than on the achievement of the control. I don't think one necessarily needs to go into that sort of deeply grim area. I do think sometimes that's a very, very extreme version of what like I'm trying to do with my schedule, right? I'm trying to sort of wrangle it and feel like I know what I'm doing. But, you know, a day where I have no social engagements and my family aren't around and I'm just sitting there and I can do exactly what I want. Like, I'm just like, oh, hang on. This isn't how I like to live. This is, this is too solitary. Or, you know, writing articles and then never publishing them would be a similar thing, right? It's like, yeah, you get total control and you, as a result, get zero, uh, of what is good in relationship, basically.
Lesson number 9, don't fight time. It always wins.
I guess this is a little bit related. I'm noticing now, really only when I have this conversation, that all these things stem from a, a similar place. But I think, yeah, I think implicit in an awful lot of time management advice and our approach to how we manage our time is that we are trying to sort of win something. It's an enemy, or as Francisco Cirillo, who invented the Pomodoro technique, says, it's a predator, and we're trying to sort of do what we do with predators, which is protect ourselves and fight back and kill it and win. And obviously, on a sort of grand level, trying to fight time on the level of your life is foolish, because you know that you know, eventually time is gonna win the fight. But on a day-to-day level as well, I think it's really useful to see that if you try to fight time with the day, you're sort of geared to trying to cram more things in to the time that you have to try to make yourself more efficient. You're to sort of keep upping the level of self-discipline and effort required. And then your standards for what you feel you ought to be able to fit in keep rising. So it's sort of guaranteed frustration, because it constantly rises and you're in this kind of fight. Time remains fixed. You have the hours that you have in a day. And so there's a sort of ever ratcheting tension, I guess. And good time management techniques, of which the Pomodoro technique can certainly be one, depending on, I think.
And what is it? I just realized I came across.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. That's just this idea of,
Go ahead.
I won't go to the details. The simple answer is it's just a question of like working in little 25-minute stretches separated by
That's
5
where
minutes.
I got it from, an interview with you, because I'd never heard of the Pomodoro technique. And
It's almost a distraction. And that is an example of sort of time blocking or time boxing. The specifics might work for some people, but it doesn't really matter so much. If you do that in the right spirit, then it's one of not like, okay, I'm going to win this battle with time today. It's more one of saying, look, time has given me this number of hours today. I am in the position of, with regard to time, I am in the sort of subservient position, right? I have these hours. So the question is, what would be the most sensible way to use them, to use my influence over how they get used? And sort of, as again, Cirillo would say, treat time as an ally. To sort of say, well, look, I've got to work with this limitation. It's not that you can't try and fit more into your day than you did yesterday or than someone else might. I don't want to make people feel like they can't sort of try to get smarter about how they work, but it's just this sort of basic mindset that says, I'm always going to be trying to cram more in. I'm always going to be trying to be more efficient. That is to be in that mindset all the time by default is to be sort of never satisfied by definition with your use of time. I think that's what I mean really by that lesson.
yes, it's very, you won't make a good Buddhist doing that. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Yeah.
All right. Lesson number 10. And if I'm allowed a personal favorite, this is it. Lesson number 10. You don't need to justify your existence.
I mean, I think I'm still learning this lesson. Maybe that's why I put it at the end. I wouldn't want to suggest that well, probably true of all of them, but especially this. I think so many people in different ways, and people of very different personalities, come out of their upbringing and the society that we live in with this basic unexamined assumption that like there's something they have to do in order that it's okay that they're taking up space. And that they get to feel sort of minimally adequate about themselves. And I think the way this happens on a day-to-day basis is we start the day often in what I've called a sort of feeling of productivity debt.
Mhm.
You sort of wake up in the morning and it's like you owe productivity. Now, obviously, if you're paid a salary by a company, there
Yeah.
is a
Mhm.
sense in which you owe
Mhm.
productivity. But this existential sense
Mhm.
is much more dangerous because it's this notion that, like, if you don't do enough in the day, you're in a kind of you're in the red somehow. And so that's why I suggest that a good little intervention there sometimes is to keep a done list. Keep a list of things you have done, and look at it building up through the day, and be like, I could have done nothing. I could have stayed in bed, and instead I did all these things that sort of resets the balance. It helps you to think that maybe you start the day not in debt, but at a zero balance, and then everything you do is just extra credit to your account. I think it's definitely something I've struggled with, still do struggle with, this sense that, like, not just that you'd rather spend a day doing certain meaningful things, or that it would be good to meet the commitment that you made to someone to meet a deadline, or that it would be better to make sure you get your workout in. These are all true, and it's great to try to live life in better ways than other ways. But the idea that you have to do that just to get up to, like, a minimal baseline. I don't know if you know about this distinction between fixed mindset and growth mindset that's attributed to
Carol
Carol
Dweck.
Dweck.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think I grew up. I think my parents did a great job. I'm not blaming them particularly. I mean, unless except to the extent that we all blame our parents. But, like, I think I did grow up with a fixed mindset. In other words, if I got really good exam results, which I did,
Mhm.
the main takeaway from that was, oh no, now I have to meet that standard or exceed it next time. And, I will just say this in a way that maybe is going to sound like bragging about this book, but since it suddenly came to my mind, I'm going to say it. It ended up on a bestseller list last week, and I was extremely cheered by this, and the publisher was extremely happy, and, like, um, everyone was, like, being really lovely. And in the quiet after that subsided, I definitely was aware of this old archaic childhood thought, like, oh, it'll be really bad if it's not on that list next week. Because, like, now this is
Yeah.
the standard that you have to meet. And it's a terrible way to go through life, to think that anything cool or good that happens to you just recalibrates the minimal definition of adequacy. Like,
Well,
forget that if you possibly can, just see the good things that you do as good things, and
mm,
not needing any further,
well, let me quote
contextualization.
George Higgins, the writer, who said that, nobody cares if you're right, nobody cares if you don't write. He would say, he would tell you, I'm channeling him to you, Oliver. He said, if you're
Yeah,
not writing to be read, you're not a writer, and you never will be. So of course you want to be read, I mean, that's
right.
what, but your point is very good. And let's go back to the Buddhism, for example. Buddhism talks a lot about suffering, and unfortunately, that is translated poorly into suffering. But the best word would be an unsatisfaction. And like somehow
Right.
you're on the bestseller list, but somehow you would become unsatisfied if you're not there the next month.
Right. Because anything good that happens to you, it feels like you're then scared of losing it. And I mean, I think I've made a lot of progress in not being this person, but I think you can still feel these patterns of, like, yeah, achievements just reset the minimum baseline for tomorrow. I feel a strange kind of compassion for myself when I think about this. I'm like, oh my goodness, don't go through life like that,
Well, God, I hope so, because one thing I learned in psychiatry, working in a psychiatric hospital, is that it all starts with self-acceptance. And that
Right.
self-acceptance is you as is right now. I mean, there's no self-improvement is necessary. Wherever you are, that's what you accept, warts and all.
Yeah.
And that's why it goes back to the significance of when I was quoting psychiatrist Ainsley Mears, being able to experience it without distortion and without defense. That's a real skill and something
Mhm.
that's a real mark of maturation, at least in my book. So,
Yeah. 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 Getting there slowly.
well, but you're quite right. I mean, if you go around having to justify your existence to other people, including yourself, something's profoundly wrong because it's just too damn hard to do.
Right. So I think, and I'm thinking here about, like, the things that Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotional
Cognitive.
behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
uh, you know, a wonderfully sort of eccentric cognitive therapist who, right. It's like, you can rate your actions. Absolutely. You can say I did a bad thing, I want to do more good things, but there's no need for that to become a global rating of you as a self. You can feel that your right to exist is just because you do exist. And I think that's true of every one of us. And then by all means, yeah, try to do more good things than bad things. Try to do more things than to fail to do things. But they don't need to all be part of this cosmic math equation, I guess, that is going to eventually spit out a result that you either did okay or you didn't. I mean, clearly a lot of religious traditions have quite a lot to answer for here when it comes to setting up these kinds of ideas.
Well, I had a career. He was a British Episcopalian priest who gave me some excellent career advice when I was in grad school, and it was, don't take it all so seriously. So, so they have some positive input as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
Oliver, let me throw you a curveball. One last question. We've been talking about the things that you've learned. What is something that you have unlearned lately? And by that, I mean something you just knew it was true a while ago, but now realize that's not the case at all. What have you unlearned lately?
Wow. That's a fascinating question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to come up with a pithy answer to it.
Normally I prep people before we start, but I forgot to.
Yeah, you're already getting this live.
That's
I mean, I suppose what I've been on a gradual process of unlearning is it's kind of in a way a point about politics and political tribalism. And I think it is an unlearning of the idea that that the world is sort of neatly separated into the goodies and the baddies, and that the people I think of as being on my side are right about everything, and the people on the other side can be endlessly condemned and mocked. I don't think this is only a political question, but I find myself constantly in these huge sort of cultural conflicts that rage on social media, and people disagreeing about the right way to react to COVID and all this stuff. I do find myself sort of seeing at least the emotional logic of people who 10 years ago I would have said were like just idiots. And I don't think it means you have to agree with with their policy proposals or anything like that. But I do find myself much less clear about how to carve the world into the good people and the bad people. And I think that's probably a positive development, but it's certainly sort of unnerving, because it definitely sort of destabilizes your sense of what the world is that you live in.
Well, which means that you're learning to live with ambiguity better. That's what I'm hearing.
Here's hoping. Yep.
All right. Well, let us close officially and formally on that note. You've been listening to the podcast, 10 Lessons That Took Me 15 Years to Learn. Our guest today has been British journalist and author Oliver Burkeman. You've been listening to us. We'd like to hear from you, listeners. You can contact us at podcast@10lessonslearned.com. That's podcast@10lessonslearned.com. And while you're there, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, because this is the podcast that makes the world a wiser place, lesson by lesson. Thanks for listening.